In this lesson, we will talk about different types of event listeners. But first, what exactly is an event listener? Think of it this way. Whenever we interact with a web browser, like when we design a web page, we need a way to handle all sorts of user interactions. For example, if a user clicks a button, that's an event. Not just a button, they could click anywhere on the page, perform an action with the mouse, or type something on the keyboard. Each of these actions is considered an event, and an event listener is what allows us to respond to those events. So, whenever a user performs an action, there are already predefined events for each of those actions. The moment that action occurs, an event is automatically generated, and we can choose to listen to that event. This process is what we call event listening. For example, let's say a user clicks on our Add Transaction button. As soon as that happens, JavaScript automatically triggers a click event. If we listen to that button's click event, we can capture and use a lot of useful information from that event. Let's make this clearer with example. Suppose we want something specific to happen when someone clicks on the text expense tracker. Here, the click is the event, and the something that happens is what we call the callback. We will learn more about callbacks in detail soon. First, we need to grab the expense tracker element. If we look at the HTML, you will notice it's inside an h1 tag with a class called title. We will use that class to select the element. So we write const header element is equal to document.querySelector in the bracket dot title. Now we have the element stored in a variable. The next step is to attach an event listener to it, so that whenever someone clicks on this text, the event fires and triggers the action we want. So what we need to do is write header element dot add event listener. This is a built-in JavaScript function that lets us attach a listener to a specific element. Since it listens for events, it's called an event listener function. In the first parameter of add event listener, we specify which event we want to listen for. JavaScript has many types of events, and I will show you a full list later. Among them, the most common one is click. That means whenever someone clicks on the expense tracker text or that element, the click event will fire. In the second parameter, we define what should happen once the event occurs. In other case, we need to decide what will happen after the click. For that, add event listener takes a function, and that function is what we call the callback function. So, in the second parameter, we pass a function. Here, we can use either an arrow function or a normal function. It doesn't matter. Whichever way we write it, that function automatically receives a parameter called the event object. You can name it event or give it any name you like. Now suppose we write console.log in the bracket event. After saving the code, notice that nothing happens if you click anywhere else on the page. But the moment you click on the expense tracker text, the console will instantly log an event object. This object is actually of type mouse event. If you expand it, you will see it contains many properties like element path, page X, page Y, offset X, offset Y, and many more. And the interesting part is we can use any of these properties to do whatever we need. And that's basically the core process of catching or listening to an event. Exactly. Depending on which event we are listening to, the data inside the event object will change. For example, since we listened for a click event on the h1 element, we only got click-related information. But if we were listening to an event on an input element, the data would be completely different. The point is, events come in many variations, and each one allows us to handle different kinds of interactions. So now, let's try out a few events in practice and see how they work. We just tried out the click event. Now let's test the double click event. For that, instead of writing click as the first parameter of add event listener, we will write DBL click. That means double click. Now, if I click once on the h1 element, nothing happens. But the moment I double click, the event is triggered right away. That's the double click event. Next, let's look at mouse events. First, take mouse down. The moment I press down on the h1 element with my mouse, meaning I hold down the click, the event is logged immediately. If we replace mouse down with mouse up, the behavior changes. This time, when I click and keep holding, nothing happens. But as soon as I release my finger, the event is logged. If I press and hold again, still nothing happens. But the moment I let go, the log shows up. That's because the mouse up event fires only when the mouse button is released. In the same way, there are plenty of other mouse events. For example, let's try mouse enter. Save the code and now notice, whenever I move the cursor inside the H1 element, the event fires immediately. No click is needed. Just moving the mouse into the element is enough. Since there's a mouse enter, there's also a mouse leave. Update the event name and test again. This time, when I move the cursor inside the element, nothing happens. Clicking or double clicking doesn't trigger anything either. But the moment I move the cursor out of the element, the log appears. That means the mouse leave event only fires when leaving the element. There's another one called mouse hover. This one fires whenever the mouse goes over the element. So, as soon as I move my cursor onto the H1 element, the event triggers right away. The opposite of mouse over is mouse out. Here, if I keep the mouse on top of the element, nothing happens. But the moment I move the cursor out of the element, the event logs immediately. Now, you might be wondering, aren't mouse leave and mouse out the same thing? And similarly, mouse enter and mouse over also seem to behave the same way. So why do we have 4 different events? The truth is, there's a subtle difference between them. To explain that properly, we will need an element that has child elements inside it. If you check the index.html file, you'll find an element called balance-summary. Since it contains multiple children, it's the perfect example to demonstrate this difference. But to make the visualization clear, let's first add some styles to the balance summary class. Open the styles.css file and find the section where the balance summary class is defined. Now, let's add a border to it. Set the border width to 1 pixel and the color to light green. After saving the code, check the browser. You will see a green border around the balance summary div element. Next, let's move over to script.js. Earlier, we used query selector with the title class, but now replace that with balance-summary. Then in add event listener, set the event to mouse enter. After saving the code, when I move the mouse into the balance summary div element, notice that the log appears only once. Even if I move the cursor around inside that div, over total balance, total expense or total income, no new logs show up. It only fired the first time I entered the div. Makes sense, right? Now let's replace mouse enter with mouse over in add event listener. This time, the moment I take the mouse over the balance summary div, one log appears just like before. But now, whenever I move the mouse over any of its child elements, new logs keep appearing every single time. So the key difference is this. With just one mouse over event listener on the parent, not only does it trigger when hovering over the parent, it also fires again whenever the mouse goes over its child elements. So the main difference is this. Mouse enter fires only once when the cursor enters the parent element, while mouse over fires not just on the parent but also every time the mouse goes over its child elements. Up to this point, we have tried out different kinds of events, and these are the most common ones. But apart from these, there are other important events that we often need to use, especially when working with input fields. Inputs usually require handling multiple types of events. Let's check out some input field events now. Our page already has several inputs, but for this example, we will use the category input field. If we look at the index.html file, you will see that this category input field has an ID attribute named category. So inside query selector, we will write #category. And instead of naming the variable header element, let's rename it to input element. Now, for this input element, the event we will use is key down. This is a keyboard event, which means every time I press a key, an event immediately logs in the console. It works very much like the mouse down event, but if we replace the key down with key up. Now imagine I press a key inside the category input field but don't release it yet. Notice that nothing logs in the console while the key is still pressed down. The moment I release the key, the log appears. That means the key up event fires exactly when the key is released. So we have seen both key down and key up. Alongside those, there's another one, key press. It works in a similar way, but the difference is that the moment you press a key, the event fires right away. It doesn't matter if you keep holding the key or release it. Just pressing is enough to trigger the event. Next, we have another important event, focus. This time, put focus as the event inside add event listener. Now, whenever you click on the input field, or place the cursor there, the event will fire immediately. Often, we need to detect cases where someone was typing in an input field, then clicked away outside and later came back again. For example, maybe we want to clear the previously entered text whenever they return. That's something we can easily manage using the focus event. The exact opposite of focus is the blur event. This fires the moment you click outside or move away from the input field. Alongside that, there's another interesting event, cut. Suppose you type something in the input field, then select it and cut it. Instantly, the cut event is triggered. You can even build some fun logic around this. For example, if someone tries to cut or copy text, you could show a playful message like, "Are you trying to steal something?" And of course, since there's a cut event, there's also a paste event. The moment you paste something into the input field, the event fires and gets logged. This can actually be really useful in practice, especially for security reasons. For instance, in password fields, we might want to prevent users from copy-pasting their password. By detecting the paste event, we can easily restrict that behavior. See how beautifully these event listeners work. Another very useful one is the input event. This fires whenever there's any change inside the input field. That means if you type a character, cut text, or paste something, no matter what kind of change happens, the input event triggers right away and logs in the console. Exactly like this, we can work with many different events beyond just inputs. Now, let's move on and explore form events. In our case, we have an add transaction button, which is actually inside a form. Instead of targeting just the button, we can select the entire form element and listen for its submit event. So, inside query selector, we will write form. That way, the form gets selected. Instead of input element, let's name the variable form element. Next, in add event listener, we will set the event to submit. That means now, whenever the form is submitted, the event will fire. Now suppose we submit the form. You will notice the log appears in the console but disappears almost instantly. Why does that happen? Because as soon as the form is submitted, the browser reloads the entire window. That's the default behavior of an HTML form submission. Submitting a form always reloads the page. But in modern web applications, we usually don't want that to happen. Instead, we need to stop this default behavior. That's why the event object we get inside the callback function has a method called preventDefault. Calling this stops the browser from reloading the page after a form submission. So we simply write event.preventDefault. With that, the default reload behavior is blocked. Now, if we console.log event after submitting the form, you will see the page no longer reloads and the event object appears nicely in the console. If we use the target property of this event object, we actually get the entire form element itself. That's because target tells us which element the event was triggered on. And in our case, that's the form element. Exactly, the event object comes with lots of methods and properties that we will explore step by step. And using event.target, you can grab any input element inside the form, even access its value directly. For example, say in the form you want to get the values of type, amount, date, or category fields individually. In that case, you can write event.target.amount.value. Now, if you save the code, type something into the amount field, and submit the form, you will see that exact value logged in the console. Makes sense, right? The reason we can access amount like this is actually pretty straightforward. Remember, I mentioned earlier that every element in HTML is treated like an object. When we use event.target, we are getting the whole form element. And since the form contains multiple input fields, the form itself acts as the parent object, while the inputs are its children. That's why we can simply use a dot after event.target to directly reach a specific input field. Now the question is, where did we get the name amount from? If we check the index.html file, you will see that the amount input field has a name attribute. And it's exactly that name attribute which lets us access it using event.target.amount. In the same way, the date field has a name attribute called date, and the category field has the name category. These name attributes are what actually become available as properties of the form element. So, if we want to retrieve the values of all the input fields, we can simply use these properties one by one. For example, we can write console.log in the bracket event.target.date.value and console.log in the bracket event.target.category.value. Now, if you save the code, fill out the form and submit it, You will see that all the input values, including date and category, are neatly logged in the console. And this is basically how we handle form data. Of course, there are plenty of advanced techniques for this, but as a beginner, learning these basics is more than enough. Before wrapping up, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will share a full list of events. For that, you can follow a specific page on W3 Schools. The link will be in the video description. Each event there is explained really well. You can spend some time experimenting with them one by one and see exactly how each one works. That's all for my discussion on event listeners. Next, we will move on to our final lesson, where we will build a small project to wrap up this entire DOM series.